November is Children's Month, and in celebration of this, we discuss all things finances with some clued up kids and financial literacy experts from Money Savvy Humans. Understanding the importance of money is valuable and powerful, and educating your children to use their finances wisely will serve them well into adulthood. It's never too early to start your kids on the road to financial literacy, so be sure to tune in as we cover guidelines, tips, and tricks for doing exactly this. Thank you so much for joining me. What I'm going to start off with first is perhaps, Catherine, you can give me a little bit insight into Money Savvy Humans. I know when I came across this, first of all, the website is absolutely beautiful. I found it very easy to navigate, and it really speaks volumes with our current theme in November, which is around raising savvy or money savvy kids. Maybe you can just touch on a little bit about what it is that you guys do.
Money Savvy is a financial education organization, and we teach kids, teens, and adults how to make and manage money. We also work with corporates and create educational content for their internal and external stakeholders. Money Savvy also has a women empowerment initiative where I sell Money Savvy licenses to women at a very low rate so they can also run a Money Savvy business and change their own financial futures. We're in the process of launching a new product called Money Savvy Entrepreneur because we've realized that the main skill that people are really missing in today's world is being able to make enough money to keep up with inflation and the cost of living at the moment. Money Savvy Kids was my first product. I was bankrupt at the age of 30, but after financially educating myself 4 years later, I was making 6 million Rand a year. And looking back, I realized that the lack of education from a young age was why I had made so many financial mistakes and gotten myself into that situation. So Money Savvy Kids is such an important product because if you can create a mindset for a child between the age of 4 and 12, which is when the learning neural pathways are developing, you can create a mindset for life. So we don't have a saving culture in South Africa or on the African continent. We're a buy now, pay later society, and that's why 70% of income earning adults are over indebted. But if you can start with kids and you start to teach them a saving culture and you teach them how to make proper financial decisions from a young age, you can actually change the next generation and start to create real generational wealth on the African continent, which hasn't yet been achieved.
I absolutely love that. I think there's so much that you've just shared with us. And maybe as my first question to you, Catherine, around that decision, you spoke about being bankrupt at the age of 30 and then 4 years later, sort of upskilling and educating yourself. It is a very hard place for any human being to find themselves in at that age. But what was that initial step and how did you take that step to sort of saying, you know what, actually, I've hit a roadblock. I now need to sort of move forward and these are the steps I'm going to take. What was that shift for you?
So sitting in my financial advisor's office and realizing we had no savings, no investments, and 17 Rand in the bank. And actually, there was no way out of the hole that we had dug ourselves into. So I realized at that point that the only way I was going to change my financial situation was if I changed my financial behavior. So the biggest catalyst was I read that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And in that, Robert Kiyosaki says, stop saying to yourself, I can't afford it, and ask yourself, how am I going to afford it? And at that point, there was this business opportunity that came around, and we obviously didn't have the money to buy the business, but I wrote a business plan. Asked myself the question, how am I going to find the money? So I wrote a business plan, spoke to some friends, and we actually got an investment to buy the business. So just actually changing one thought process was a catalyst for a whole lot of things that happened. But behavior change happens over time. So it started with things like goal setting, going to secondhand bookstores and finding as many financial books as I can and reading up and understanding and getting knowledge, signing up for every free webinar and class that I could find. I started to budget. I started to get my tax affairs in order. I started to look at how I could create multiple income streams for myself. So it was a process, and it's still a work in progress, of just changing financial behaviors to set myself up for financial security in my retirement age.
Love that. Absolutely love that. And it's got so many golden nuggets of what we speak to in our articles as well. I just want to come back to the kids thing, and I echo your sentiments 100%. They are such sponges, and especially at that tender age, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 12, it is learnt behavior. And I am amazed by the types of conversations happening in the circles with kids at my daughter's school, for example, around money. And, reading your site and what it is that you guys offer through your programs, I was really, really just amazed. And I think we need to have this conversation. We need to start not thinking that having a conversation or the 2-year-olds or the 3-year-olds or the 4-year-olds are not going to be picking up and echoing the bad choices as well as the good choices that we make, and how that then impacts as they navigate their childhood as well as their teenage years and adulthood. So very topical at the moment. Aneen, I want to jump to you very quickly. The money savvy kids and money savvy teens, do you perhaps just want to give me a little bit insight into the programs? What do they consist of and how do they generally work?
We have online platforms and we have in-person workshops. So we can go to the schools or we can go to institutions where they offer education. And it's generally sort of a day or two program, or it could be longer. We basically would tailor it according to who the client is and what the age of the children are. And then we basically take them through all the steps of becoming money savvy. What is money? Where does it come from? How to save your money, how to protect your money, how to grow your money. And then we eventually also look at entrepreneurship and how to earn your own income. So it's very much based on what that specific institution wants from us. And then we put that content together for them.
Right. And is it just based on institutions, or can this be sort of myself and my daughter coming as an example?
Yes, we have online classes for that as well. So yes, we can absolutely do that too.
Fantastic. And I love the different scenarios that you mentioned, around what is budgeting, what is saving, how does one save? And as part of this particular podcast, we actually interviewed quite a few kids and asked them very similar questions. What is money?
Money is where you can buy stuff with it.
Where does money come from?
My mommy gets money from a work, a bank.
It comes from chocolate coins.
What do you use money for?
To buy toys, food.
For buying snacks.
I would buy ginger biscuits.
What is saving?
Saving is when you put money in your money box when you get money, and then you don't need to ask anybody, because then you saved all your money and then you can buy something nice.
Saving is when you put money on your bank account to use it for later.
Are you saving for anything important?
No.
No, I don't save my money because my mom doesn't give me any pocket money.
Yes, I'm saving for a smartwatch.
I'm saving for a mini bank for kids at Toys R Us. You can put your own pin in it and you can save your money in it.
When you grow up, do you think you will be good with money?
Yes, because my mom taught me how to save.
Well, I know money in between. I know a little bit and I don't know a lot of it. So, kind of.
Yes, because I am good at math and like doing math calculations.
Based on their responses, they had a very good insight, or at least age appropriately so. They could tell us they could put money aside, they're saving for a toy, they're saving. And those kinds of things are also such important conversations to have in and around the home. I know something I've instituted a couple of years ago. I've got a 10-year-old daughter and a soon-to-be 5-year-old son. And I bought them each an ATM. So it's like a little kiddie version of an ATM. It's got the coin facility, like a little hole for the coins, but it's also for the notes. So it kind of sucks up the notes as you put them in, and it says something like, good job, you're saving, you now have 100 Rand, as an example. And the pure joy and the understanding of what we as adults tend to sometimes overcomplicate It was such a wonderful experience to witness them understand the value of money. And I think that's something that's really missing in society. I know when kids come and they say, oh, I need 100 Rand for school, or I need this, or I need that. We as parents, typically, we want to give the best. We want to give them what we didn't have perhaps growing up. And I know I'm in a similar situation, didn't grow up with lots of cash to spare, but at the end of the day, I do want to inculcate this culture inside of my home that it is earned, and that when we're spending our own money, we are also valuing and putting a value and effort on whatever goods or services we are acquiring. And therefore, there's then a responsibility to upkeep, to look after, to protect what we've worked hard for. And I think that's really important. Olivia, I'd like to jump to you very quickly. What would you say are some of the key takeouts from, let's say, the younger kids or the youngest kids that have gone through your program?
One of the biggest things that always stands out is understanding the difference between a need and a want. It's such a simple concept, yes. But if one can highlight to these young kids what the difference is when they're at these young ages, it soon becomes apparent to them that it is important to distinguish between the two and important to start thinking about the difference. Because I think if you can teach them from that age, if your future self could thank you for something, they'd thank you for not spending money always on the things that you want, so that eventually you don't not have money for the things that you need. So I think that's one of the big takeaways. And the other takeaway is just that it opens the eyes of these young people, just that there are opportunities to change their lives, to small little incremental differences or changes that they make now can absolutely make a big difference to them and the family around them and the friends around them. It's just amazing to see the kind of excitement and the desire to implement these changes immediately and kind of go out into the world, and especially if they're 18 years old, to go and start a business, to try and make some money for themselves on the side that can be a way of generating wealth and building wealth for themselves.
Love that. You mentioned something about your future self. If it's going to thank you for anything, it's going to thank you for being sort of financially savvy. What I like to say to myself is that your future self, Shafika, is not that forgiving. It is not going to be forgiving. And I've learned this from someone inside of the business that I actually conducted a podcast with a couple of months ago. But she said, come 50, come 40, 80, whatever, you're not going to be as forgiving with yourself as you think you would. And so we always talk about the need versus want, and we often go to the media with this as well. And I think it doesn't help that the age and the time that we're in, where we've got the 4-year-olds and the 5-year-olds who are savvy on things like TikTok and social media. And I think that plays such a massive role in this sort of instant gratification culture that we've got going on in South Africa. And I think that's such an important one to break. I often go on the radio, and one of the biggest questions I always get is around influencers, right? And I always say the watch that influencer has, or the car that they're driving, or the fancy trip that they've just been on, it's possibly all sponsored, and chances are the clothing and the watches need to be returned. And so there is definite power in working hard and earning your space in whatever field you have or whatever field you choose. But I think there also needs to be a realistic expectation set that that's not going to be generally what the majority of our kids are going to end up doing, or successfully so. I mean, often my daughter watches TikTok. She'll come to me and it will be a slime video or unicorn, whatever. And she'll be like, oh, wow, Mom, did you see this? And often they have these filters where they show you one thing and then in a few seconds it transforms into something completely different. And I often have to explain to her that this is the expectation that they want you. This is how sort of the marketing hook happens. Going to the store, the impulsive buying as well. Now she says, oh, Mommy, you know why they put the sweets here? It's because they know Amir, who's a little brother, is going to want it. And so I've started having those questions because it's incredibly important. And so when she comes to me with, Mommy, I need something, and my question or my response to her is always, what happens if you don't get it? What's going to happen to you if you don't get it? And very quickly I can start to see the cogs in her mind going, actually, you know what? I'm not going to have the same thing as my friend, but actually I'm not going to be worse off. I'm going to be okay. So generally we'll opt for a second-hand version, or we won't opt to have it at all. And that's also okay. But again, being a kid, and I don't know how long it's been for you guys, but I'm going to say it hasn't been very, very long ago for me. But remembering being a kid myself, I was the kid that was walking around with the very cheap shoes and the shirts, the school shirts bought by maybe a less popular brand. And it wasn't a nice feeling. And so, yes, I understand there's this thing from the parent side where we've got to institute living a lifestyle within our reach and not trying to keep up with the Joneses. But I also understand and I know what it feels like to be a kid. But I think on top of that, there's this level of education that comes in that could be so empowering in the conversations that they are having, that it's definitely going to positively impact as they journey ahead into their teens and adulthood. So, yeah, I mean, look, guys, this has been an incredible conversation for me so far. I'd like to go back to Catherine and maybe just tell me your insights on the current trends in terms of the financial gap in South Africa. What is it that you know? Obviously, you've done a lot of research before putting these programs together. What was kind of the biggest takeout for you in terms of the gap that is currently existing in our society?
So firstly, money conversations in homes and organizations are taboo. We're not talking about money. We're not sharing our budgets with our children, and we are perpetuating learned behaviors. So an example, my mother told me money didn't grow on trees. I found myself telling my children money didn't grow on trees. And what I've realized through all of the workshops that we've done, and it doesn't matter what age you are, is that a lot of us are not aware of our money mindset. So, we grow up in an environment and we have two parents, and those two parents each have their own financial blueprint, and they blueprint that onto us. A lot of our money values are actually not our own. So one of the most important things that we do in our training is we actually teach teens and adults how to interrogate how much of their money mindset actually came from them and how much of it was given to them by their schools, their churches, their parents, their influencers, and the people around them. So we really need to change mindsets, because if we can start to change mindsets and the way that people start to think about money, we'll be able to change the future. So this is not a South African problem. This is an African continent problem. We are not taught to think about tomorrow. Because we have so much poverty, we're so busy trying to survive today that we're never planning ahead. We've just realized with COVID, tomorrow is not promised. We don't know what's coming. And COVID wiped out many businesses and many families and put this country into a huge economic crisis. So what I find with the youth as well, one of the biggest problems that we have is that everybody's driven by image. So the more expensive your handbag, the more expensive restaurants that you go to, and the more you're sharing this shows people your value in life. And money doesn't create value for you. So one of the other things that we teach, which is vitally important, is we teach people to understand, what is it that you value? What is it that's important to you? Because if you understand what you value, you're going to be able to prioritize spending your money in the right way. So I started working at 15. When I'm 51, I want to retire, and I want to retire with over 100 million rand because I want to travel the world. So I have a plan. I've been working on this plan for 8 years already. And so for me, I value having a retirement where I'm free from my kids and my responsibilities and I can travel the world. So I save 50% of everything I earn. I have a lot of insurance because I need to mitigate a lot of the risks in my life. So because I understand what's important to me, I'm able to set up financial structures and make payments that work with my values and are actually going to create something sustainable so that when I'm in retirement, I have enough money to retire.
You mentioned earlier about, the learnt and the perpetuated behavior. We actually had a podcast a couple of months ago where we spoke about this very thing. And some of the questions I posed to the panelists was, what are the things that you've consciously taken with you that you've learnt from either your guardian, your school, your church? And then what are some of the things you want to unlearn? And I think this concept of unlearning baffles people quite a lot. You are able to unlearn, you are able to reparent, you are able to change the dynamic. You are able to inculcate something completely new. And I think when you were talking about this topic of money being taboo, I remember growing up, parents were parents, adults were adults, and kids were not involved in the conversations around money, especially when it wasn't a secure sort of financial environment. And so I was always sent out of the room. And I think it's so easy to move forward with that very mindset. But my goal was actually to flip that completely around and to not have that be present in my household. And that was a very serious conversation I actually had to have with my husband before we had kids. And we only had kids about 5-6 years after we got married. So we had a bit of practice time in how we would address these things. But so important, I've definitely seen this shift in with my own two kids, as kids who come out of a home where budgets are shared. And when we go grocery shopping, we take a list and we give the one list to the 4-year-old, one list to the 10-year-old, and we make them select brands based on quality and price. And then obviously bringing in our rewards cards. And I understand that there is a little bit of effort involved in being transparent and understanding and being on the same page with your partner when you're chatting to the kids especially, but it's so important. I read an article recently that before people start dating on these dating apps, they actually now insert their credit score as part of their profile, which I thought was really interesting. And I did an hour-long interview on Kaya FM a couple of months ago, where we actually divulged and discussed what are the types of information you need to consider asking or talking about when you start dating. Why is this not a thing? So very interesting how differently we all view money. And Catherine, you mentioned something about we're so busy trying to survive today that we don't really think about tomorrow. I know that for the large part of South Africa, and I can speak about South Africa because this is obviously the area in which we work, but I do know that it's not easy. It is not easy when you're coming from the poverty line. You're working really hard. You consider the interest rate. You consider the fact that salaries are not keeping up, not by a long shot, and you've got your head buried in the sand. And even though you and I know that that's probably not the best way to go, you can only kick the can down the road for so long, we have to admit that it's not that easy to sort of just become financially secure. It's not something, obviously we've mentioned, it doesn't happen overnight. What would you suggest is the place to start if you're in this kind of situation where you don't see light at the end of the tunnel? And let's be honest, this is the majority at the moment. In your expertise, what would you advise on that first step in terms of getting your head out of the sand as an adult?
You were saying there that being honest with yourself is important. And I think that is something that a lot of adults really struggle to do, because if you're in debt and you have children around you, it's really difficult to keep a straight face for them or try and just make things positive. But I think that honesty is extremely important, and you need to have a conversation with whoever else is in your household and sit down and actually get the numbers on paper, on a computer, on a spreadsheet, whatever it is that works for you. But make sure that every single cent that you spend and every single cent that you have as income is visible somewhere, that you can have a look at it and not try and just twist it in your head to the way that you would like it to be. And the moment you actually see it, sometimes that feeling is very overwhelming and it's stressful, but that is the first place where you can start to now look and say, okay, what can I do now? And then you can see where you go over your budget. You know, why am I not in the green? And have honest conversations and say, which of these expenses, Olivia mentioned that earlier, the needs and the wants, that is so relevant for us as adults as well. Skip the coffee on your way to work every day. Have your coffee at home, or, you know, those kind of things. But sit down, work out what you spend your money on. And if you're in debt, make sure that you make a list of every single account that you might have. Write it down. What is the amount that you owe? What is the interest rate that you owe on that? And work out where you can start. And a lot of times people feel completely overwhelmed and they say, well, I can't start anyway because I don't have any money. You can start with little things. So you don't necessarily have to go and sell your house. Keep your house and let's just see how we can bring things down, bring down the costs of your everyday living, and then look at your debt as well and say, which of these amounts of money that I owe should I tackle first? And look at the interest rates and look at the amount of money. Now, a lot of times when you look at debts, it can also be very overwhelming. And if you look at what people owe on their houses, for instance, it's a 20-year commitment. And people always say, yes, put all your money into your house immediately. And yes, of course, that is a good idea to pay off your house. But if you have smaller amounts of money that you owe, sometimes it's worth your own mental state to say, I'm going to tackle the small one first. And I pay that off first. And the moment you've paid off that first debt, that feeling that you get of relief that I don't have to pay that anymore, and then you take that money and you roll that over and you start paying off the next one slowly, slowly, slowly. People need to sometimes feel that, because otherwise you just pay and pay and pay and you feel like you're never ever going to get out of it. But I think clarity and actually knowing what you're in for is one of the most important things. And to be honest with yourself, and whether that means crying or screaming, it doesn't really matter. Do it. Feel the feelings. Go through those mindset things that Catherine mentioned earlier and say, why am I feeling this? Why did I get into this position? Yes, sometimes be hard on yourself, and then sometimes also forgive yourself, because a lot of these things happened over COVID periods. Lots of people lost their income, and sometimes those lessons are important as well to make you reset. I think something that personally was a big learning curve for me in COVID was that I was pretty good at saving. I've done that all my life, and investments and all those things. But the one thing that I did not know was how important it is to have multiple streams of income. And if I had that during COVID, I wouldn't have been hit nearly as hard as I was. So that's something I try to teach my kids. And adults can do like that. You can figure out other ways to earn money as well. You don't only have to do one thing. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but I think the starting point is be honest with yourself, sit down, get it on paper, and then come up with an action plan that is actually workable.
I love that. Because again, you know, the best thought processes without an action plan are just thought processes. So I love that. I also fully agree with you. And we've given this sort of guidance before in many of our articles about potentially looking at paying off the smallest account first, because that is a motivating factor. And I agree with you, the potential gratification that comes with paying that off really could catapult your determination to conquer the rest of your commitments as well, your financial obligations. So I get that 100%. Olivia, I'm going to jump to you very quickly. So we've spoken about adults and how we would very practically look at ways of raising our head, putting up our hand, and just being honest with ourselves. But let's say you have come from a traditional family where money is kind of off the table when it comes to kids, but you now are starting to consider flipping the switch and changing the script on that and considering being more open. How would you begin that conversation? Obviously age appropriately with each of them, but how would you bring that into your daily lives inside of the household? And at Just Money, we like offering practical tips, things that once they've concluded listening to this podcast, they can start implementing. Do you have any wise advice for us over there?
My kids at the moment are 4 and not even 1. And I grew up in a household where, luckily for me, money was not taboo. And my parents made it very clear that money was scarce and that they created a space for us to be part of that conversation. But with the overhang, like Catherine said, that money doesn't grow on trees. They wanted us to be aware of it all the time. And I think that that is a beneficial thing. And I think that that can be the starting point when you want to start introducing money concepts into the household, is to make it a family affair. And I think that we also mentioned earlier that goal setting and how can we get there. So if we can't afford this now, what can we do as a family together to perhaps get this thing that you want at a later stage? So I think that these practical things that you're doing with your family already are really, really brilliant, including the kids in the shopping trips. But I mean, from a practical perspective, let's say that the teenager wants whatever the latest things are. I don't have teenagers. I've got absolutely no idea what the cool things are at the moment, but I do know that social media plays a very, very important part. So if there are things that they are seeing that their influencers or the people that they follow are telling them to go out and get, that they can come to a safe space at home. It should be safe for them to come and ask a question where they know that they can then sit together with you to understand how they can plot a plan to achieve whatever it is that they want. Obviously, first determining whether it's a need or a want. And I think just allowing the space to talk about it, and then starting with a goal, and then if there's something that needs to be forfeited in order to achieve a goal that they want to, in order to gain something. So for example, they would like a car and a set of skis, I don't know. but maybe the family has to forfeit something in order to achieve that. So if they want this car, then you can't go on a skiing holiday for that year. And I realize that these are very big things. So maybe let's bring it back to small things. So your 5-year-old would like a unicorn for Christmas, but she needs to start putting money into a piggy bank in order to kind of help achieve that goal.
Can I jump in?
Yes,
I've got a
please.
really cool practical example that I applied at home. So I'm a mom to 3 boys, and my kids were 4, 8, and 12 when I started working and creating Money Savvy as a product. So I really got the chance to test out some of my theories. So what I did for the kids was I gave them each a jar, and in the jar they each had 200 rands worth of 1 rand coins, 2 rand coins, and 5 rand coins. And there was a chore list and a responsibility list that had to happen every day. So my kids had to pack their own lunch for school, which meant unpacking their lunch boxes so it could get washed, packing their school lunch, making sure their homework was done, making sure we could leave for school on time the next morning, etc. If they didn't pack lunch and I had to do it for them, 5 rand came out the jar. If they made us late for school because they forgot to brush their teeth and had to go back in, 5 rand came out of the jar. There was also a reward process. So there were things that they could do to make their money back. So if they mowed the lawn, they could make 20 bucks. If they helped on a Saturday with these things, they could make 5 rand. So there was always ways for them to make the money back. So all of them wanted to make sure that they each got their 200 rand every single month. So they always made sure to make sure that if they were losing money, that they were doing stuff to put it back.
I love that. And I think it's such a practical, and it doesn't have to be 200 rand. 1 rand coins that makes up 50 rand. It's a lot to a little kid. So I love that. And generally what I do is I've got a weekly planner on my fridge and I have a point system. So the 5-year-old, the 4-year-old has chores, the 10-year-old has age-appropriate chores, and when they do it, they each get assigned a point. And I don't necessarily reward with money just because I don't know if I'll always be able to, and I didn't want to set that precedent. So what I've done was, whoever has the most points gets to choose the lunch or dinner spot for the weekend. So because we generally eat out quite a bit as part of our lifestyle, I wasn't really losing. It was just giving them the choice, and they seem to get really excited about it. So I think there are a lot of ways that we as parents can actually make it work for us, where we're bringing them into a part of what's already happening, but just offering them a choice and getting them excited about it. So I've even got the younger one who wants to do the chores of the 10-year-old because he wants to be the one to choose pizza, because the 10-year-old doesn't like pizza. So it's either always between pizza or sushi. And they know that if they've got the most points, they are going to be the one who gets their choice of meal. So very, very different concept. But again, I can definitely see the value. And also, obviously, it depends on the types of kids. My son would not care if he had to give me money because he doesn't really understand the value yet. He just knows that paper money is more. So again, maybe when they're older, I'll try something slightly different. But for now, that seems to be working for me. Aneen, do you have any other practical sort of reward systems that you know of that you've maybe implemented in the past that you could potentially share with us?
So my children at the moment are 13 and 11 years old. We've also done a lot of the shopping trip exercises. As you teach math, in the same breath, you teach budgeting and comparing prices. Work out what is better, 2 of the 9-pack toilet paper or 1 of the 18 and those kind of things. So we've done a lot of that as well. And something that I've started doing more recently, now that they're a little bit bigger, is when they come to us and ask for things like, I want to have this party, or I want to do this or that, or go out, or whatever the case might be, especially around parties, because that's sort of the age where they are, then I would say to them, okay, come back to me with 3 proposals. 1 for 3 kids, 1 for 10 kids, 1 for 20 kids, or whatever the number of kids are that they want at the party. And then you're going to do a proposal to me, and I want to know what you're going to do, what it's going to cost. So they have to go onto the internet, obviously safe internet, and go do their own research, find out the prices from the stores, see what the things cost. If they want to make hot dogs, find out what a hot dog's going to cost, work it all out, and then they come back to me and they say, okay, if we invite 3 children, it's going to cost us so much. And so forth and so forth. And then if we feel it's reasonable that we can just do it as a family, then of course we'll do that. Sometimes we say, okay, maybe we can offer you the 3 kids, but if you want the 20, what things do you think you can do to earn some money before the party so that you can actually have your party? So then they have to figure out in their own way how to earn the money to make that happen. So we do a lot of that. I think where it comes from for me is that I grew up in a household with 2 teachers as parents. So money was very seldom even a conversation because my parents never had to go find extra money. They had a budget, that's what it was, and they knew that that was going to be the income for the rest of their lives. So they were never in a situation where we were, where money comes and goes sometimes. So I always feel I want to empower my kids to know that they are in charge of their own destiny. They have to make the money. Nobody's going to give it to them. A job is not going to give it to them. Figure out ways to make your own money to buy the things that you want.
I love that. Just talking now, it's just so telling to me how wonderfully diverse we are. My dad gave myself and my brother, who was 3 years younger than me, it was a Sunday night. It was just before carte blanche, and we would run around the house with plastic bank packets. And we were given those, and we had a treasure hunt every Sunday. So we'd rummage through the house, we'd look under mattresses, in old blazer pockets of my dad, under couches, behind the TV stand. And we assumed at the time it was money that my father had hidden for us to find. And so whoever found the most money, we'd hand it over to my father and we'd get like a little sweet or a treat. When in actual fact, not being transparent with us at the time has, in my teens, resulted in a little bit of resentment, because I later found out it wasn't money that my father actually hid. It was money he didn't know he had, and he wanted us to find so that we could buy a bread. And so those are the kinds of things that I was exposed to. And obviously in my teens, I also realized that when my father said he wasn't hungry or we had lunch at work, it wasn't because he wasn't hungry. It was because my brother or I asked for seconds and he'd go to bed without food. So very different situation. And my father was the only one working at the time. And obviously during apartheid, it was a very, very difficult time for him. And I think what it's done for me, though, it's taught me a lot about what I would like to take forward in terms of his determination and the way in which he managed his money, despite it being very low at the time. But then also it made me want to unlearn some of the things that I now practice, sort of being open with my kids a bit more. And yes, our financial situations are very different, but I think there are some golden nuggets when it comes to transparency around money and children. Olivia, I'll jump to you very quickly. Is there any other rewards or practical tips that you could potentially part with?
We spoke earlier about brands. When we were younger, we were wearing shoes that were the cheapest and maybe not wearing clothes that had the brands. And we grew up the same way. What my parents tried to instill is that for a lot of people, money means power. And people try to reflect that power in what they own. So the cars, the houses, the watches, the whatever the case may be. But I think that we should try and see that money is power, but it's power in a different sense. You have the ability to make yourself financially free. So you can allow yourself not to be trapped by money. If money is something that allows you to buy material things, I think that you will always be trapped. So the practical thing for me is maybe to try and instill in kids that if they can save and if they can try and build that resource for themselves, it will allow them to make choices one day and be the masters of their own destiny, as Anine said. So, create the self-worth in your child that the money is not, or the material things that come from that money is not what makes them. And this could be the same for social media, that is such a big part of our children's lives now, is that they are then less influenceable because they understand that their self-worth comes from something else, and that the money that they look after is something that will then allow them as adults to be free, or to at least have some sense of freedom and choices. So maybe not practical, but just something that I believe could be very valuable.
I love that. And you know what I just thought of now is you said not as easily influenced as a kid by sort of social media and sort of external factors. And I'm very lucky in the position that I am, because my daughter and my son often hear me on the radio or see me on TV. And something they've noticed is they're like, Mom, you look and you sound different when you're on TV. And I'm like, yes, because that's what I want you to see. So just remember that when you're watching social media and you're watching influencers, you are seeing exactly what they want you to see. And so there's this perception and there's the actual reality. And I think if we have those conversations with our kids, and there's a lot of practical examples of this, what it appears to be and what it actually is. And people just don't talk about the bad things or when they're struggling financially. People are generally more open to being flashy. And so that then tends to be the trend on social media. I think what we're going to do is I'd like to just close off. Maybe there's any final thoughts from you, Catherine, before we wrap up.
So firstly, if you are listening to this podcast and you're not quite sure how to raise a money savvy kid and you'd like to get some guidance in how to do it based on their age, you can go to our website, moneysavvyhumans.co.za, and on our Money Savvy Kids page, there's a free ebook that you can download called Raising Money Savvy Kids. There's free tools and resources out there for you guys. You don't have to do this on your own. I think what I would really like to say, it was the point that Olivia touched on, is tomorrow is never promised. We've just been through the biggest global epidemic of our time, and it probably won't be the last in our lifetime. So we really need to teach our children to start to be able to hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And you need to start encouraging them to start saving from the minute that they start making money. So my money jar story that I referred to earlier, I had one rule, and my kids had to save 50% of their money every month in a bank account that I went and opened for them. And that was my non-negotiable. I started that saving culture really early, and now my 19-year-old has his first job, 3,500 Rand a month, but he's saving 2,000 of it. And that was a culture that I started with him from the age of 12. So I just want to encourage all parents, if you aren't saving or you aren't saving enough, it's never too late or too little to start. And if you can create a saving culture for your child, if they start saving from their first paycheck, they're going to be able to retire with money in the bank because of the benefit of compound interest.
Money is a reality we deal with daily, whether we're working for it, spending it, or wishing we had more. The financial lessons we learn while we are young have a lasting impact. By teaching our children how to be savvy from an early age, they can handle their money with confidence, spend sagely on the must-have essentials such as ginger biscuits, and avoid accruing bad financial habits which can be hard to break. Our hope is that our conversation today has inspired and equipped you to broach the tough topics with your kids and yourself, and that together we can raise a money-savvy generation. Keep an eye out on this channel for further podcasts. Thank you for tuning in and stay savvy.